Okay, so hello everyone and welcome. As in the other cycles we've had in Manila, we used to have some collaborative review sessions to discuss changes in Manila for cycle. So this is the first one of the set of collaborative reviews we intend to have for the Xena cycle. And this first meeting is about discussing shared server migration enhancements. So basically, shared server migration was implemented during the Victoria release, and it was implemented in a way, but now there are some things that we identified that could be improved, and that's what we started implementing it. So here's the details are in this Etherpad is available in the mail we sent in the mailing list. Also, this meeting room is here, but we usually take a lot of time in these meetings, and in order to save us some time and also have a demonstration of this functionality, and if with these improvements we are proposing, I've recorded the demonstration and it's available in this link here. There's need to have this passcode to access the video. It's a 13-minute video where I explain some stuff and what's changed, and basically explain some modifications we've done in the NetApp implementation for the shared server enhancements. And basically, in this meeting, the idea is to cover these 3 changes, basically. So the first one of them, and I think that I would say one of the most important is basically the part that touches the core of the shared server migration. So, but what are these enhancements about? In the way we designed shared server migration, we did not allow shared servers to be reused in the backend, and we always requested new shared servers and in the backend. And so basically, if a backend supported that, supported reusing the shared server during the migration, it would not be allowed to, and a new shared server would always be requested during the creation, as well as there was no way to basically there was no way to reuse the network allocations for in a shared server. So in a shared server migration, so that's another thing we wanted to improve with this change. So basically, this is about allowing shared servers to reuse or backends to reuse shared servers when migrating it to another cluster or another backend, and also allowing to reuse the network allocations in case the backend supports such functionality. So these are basically the 2 most important things we intend to reach here with this change. And so let's start with some changes we've done. I will start with basically the API stuff. So there's a micro version bump for this change, and basically where we introduced a new parameter called CleanupSearchServer, where we would allow administrators to basically strictly say they would like the search server to be immediately deleted after the shared server migration is completed. So this was one of the things we modified here, and we've added this possibility to the administrators. So this change here basically changes the API, but there is another change here, changing the Python Manila client as well. And there's a micro version bump and other things we needed to do in order to get this this implemented. This is one of the parts of it. And then there was basically forwarding this parameter to the backends when we were starting the migration. So here in the shared driver, this is one of the important modifications we've done. because like, as I said, we intended to allow drivers to reuse shared servers or reuse network allocations as well if they were able to. And in order to do that, two new driver interfaces were implemented. The first one of them is IP reusage supported on shared server migration. And then when setting up a shared server, we can just ask the backend if it can reuse the IPs considering the parameters that were provided during the migration requests or the migration check. And the other one is if the shared server migration mechanism can reuse the shared server. So these are basically two driver interfaces that we needed to add in order to get that done, to allow to have a control of whether the shared server can reuse network allocations or the shared server itself in the backend or not. And basically those were the changes for the shared driver. And here modifying the interface for the container driver as well. So as we modified the main interface in the driver interface. And here the storage helper for the container driver as well. And yeah, the interface for shares for the NetApp driver. And now the changes on the share manager. So these changes in the share manager were necessary because we needed to validate some things while requesting a share server when we were basically migrating a share server. So now when we are requesting a share server for a share server migration, we are basically forwarding the search share server in the request as well, so we can get some more information about it in the provide process. And we have here like the some modifications in the setup info for share servers. But I would say the most important things are basically here in this setup server. So basically here, we always assume that the network reusage, it's like we will always need to reallocate new network, and the share server will always be set up in the backend. But if the share server is basically being migrated, we just ask the backend if the share server could either reuse the network allocations or reuse the share server during the migration. So basically there's like this method doing this validation. So it calls the driver interfaces and it checks if the new share network subnet ID is equals to the destination to the source. And then we just compare these things now. And if there is need to set up the share server in the backend, then the driver will be called to set up the share server. Otherwise, it will be only a database entity. And in the end of the share server migration process, it will be tied to the identifier of the backend, of the share server in the backend. And also, if we now only update the allocations and get new allocations for the share server, we would only do that if new allocations were needed. So basically, this method is responsible for doing those validations. And here we just allocate that. And in case, and like at this moment, we will do nothing because, I mean, the new share server won't be started yet, and there wouldn't be conflicts. And as like if the backend said it supports reusing IPs, it shouldn't be a problem here. So if we do not need new network allocations, we just skip this part, and then at the end of the migration complete process, we can just say that we need to update the network allocations, and we will change the relationship from the source share server to the destination share server. So if there's need to set up in the backend, we do the setup in the backend. If there's need to allocate a new network, we can just ask new network to be allocated. And here, in case it fails, we only if new network allocation was added, we just deallocate them in the setup server. But yeah, and as I said, in the migration complete now, we are basically
Hold
getting.
on, Carlos.
Yep.
Is there a so what you're saying when you're setting up the server, you are going to check if this share server that is being set up is a migration destination, right?
Yes.
And then you're going to ask the share driver if it supports reusing existing allocations.
Yes.
So how is this this particular check happening? Like in the sense, is it happening per share server migration, or is that something static that the driver can always do based on a given storage system or something?
It's basically using the share server migration, but the share backend can like decide on like whether it should do it this or not. But in this check here, there are two things we are taking into consideration. So the first one is the answer from the backend. Like if the backend, in this case, we forward the share server, the search share server, or the destination share server host and the search share server host, and the backend can check if it's possible to migrate and to reuse the network allocations. And this is this is one part of it. The other part of it is basically if there is no network changes. So basically, if I'm changing share networks, there is no how to reuse the network allocations because the subnets are different and these things. So that's basically what the checks we are doing now. The first one is to ask if the backend supports it, and the backend can do its validations to see if the reusage will be supported, and if there was like a network change for this. So and then in this method we just return these two values
Awesome.
to the setup
Okay,
server.
that makes sense. So from the user's perspective or the administrator's perspective, there's no way of telling if this is going to become if this migration is going to be non-disruptive or there's going to be a network change. The only way is if they preserve the same share network ID. It's possible that this is non-disruptive. Is it? Is that? Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, yes. The share server migration can be non-disruptive, but only if there is no network change. Because if there is network change, then when we just like get the other share server working, the destination share server like up, the IP would have changed, and then people that have mounted the share would have a problem with that because they mounted using the previous export location, not the new one with the new IP. So when there is no network change, the non-disruptive migration would be possible because we would be reusing the same IP. And then during the switchover phase or the second phase of the migration, it should be completely okay.
Yeah, the part I'm this thing is if let's say an administrator wants to move their share server from host, this particular host which has one NetApp storage to another host, right? So they want to first, they want to be able to say, okay, should I be rereading the exports list from Manila and refreshing my exports at the end of this migration, or can I just forget about that part because this is going to be non-disruptive? How does an admin know that part today? Like you might have already answered that, but I'm just trying to ask that question with the UX perspective. Um,
Yeah, so in the check, the administrator is already able to have an idea, like if a non-disruptive migration was requested, then
mhm.
the check will, if the check responds like compatible, the administrator should be okay just to like trust in the check response because the backend would have validated it and would also have validated that. Uh, and yeah, that's basically
Oh, so okay. So what I was missing was we have added non-disruptive in the past, but we weren't. No driver implementation was there. And so right now, this is the first time a driver implementation has non-disruptive shared migration, right? So the
yes.
check is going to say set non-disruptive to true or false um, on that stuff. Okay. Is there something that we're also handling at the core? layer where we know that when you're going from share network A to B, it can't be non-disruptive. So we automatically detect this in the API.
No, we do not. There aren't changes here. I've performed this check. I took care of that, but basically, it was done in the driver layer. So yeah, but that's something to be like kind of worried about, because when there is a network change and like, but yeah, I mean, this could be performed by by the by the core as well. But at this moment, I've performed this in the driver level. So we forward this information to the drivers, and then based on the mechanism they are using, if there is no network change, we can just like reuse the network allocations. And if there is no network change and the driver supports reusing the share server and the network allocations, then the migration should be non-disruptive.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's kind of the path that share migration also takes, right? Wait, even if you don't request non-disruptive migration, if that's what we can provide, we'll just do it anyway. And that part makes sense. But I meant in the API, if you were to, if somebody says move my share server to this new share network, you know that the current existing share network is different. We could perform whatever validation right there as well, and let them know, this isn't going to work because you're requesting non-disruptive migration and you want to move to a different share network. But I guess the problem there is we're not really about the share network; it's about that specific network and the underlying neutron network in this case, perhaps. So we should also be checking against the neutron subnet and the particular AZ that they want to go to that particular subnet. If that is the one that we can still reuse, then it's worth checking with the backend if the non-disruptive migration is possible. But I guess what I'm asking for is like a UX enhancement in the API, because we don't seem to be doing any such checks right now. So let me go ahead and make note of that, and I'll let you know what I think on this thing. But thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And it's nice. It's a great idea, because we could fail earlier in this case, because like we know the share network is different from the previous one, and the user requested a non-disruptive migration. So we could just check the neutron net ID and neutron subnet ID and see if they are equal, even though the share network subnet ID could be like different. But yeah, we could fail earlier on this, and it's a good point. Thanks.
Awesome.
So yeah, for the setup share server, that's basically the thing here. And then there are some other modifications when we are basically doing the now there's another thing important here in the share server migration start, where we've added some stuff in order to have, like, if the share server migration wants to return anything to be like set in the backend right now, we can just return it directly from the driver and also set it in the backend details of the share. At this point, this could be used by like any backend that wants to save any information about the migration in the share server in the backend details. And yeah, but it will be kind of up to the driver to see what it will return, and we will need to check what's you would need to check usability as well on this, because we would need to see what the drivers are returning and what would be the parameters. So yeah, that's another thing on the share server migration start. And now for the share server migration complete, there are some other changes where basically in the beginning I said we aren't doing like anything in case the share backend can reuse the network allocations. But here in this case, we've not allocated a new IP there. We haven't done a lot of things there. And now in this part, in the migration complete is where we decided to put some stuff, because we can just like reassign the IPs, the ID of the share server that the allocation belongs to. So the network allocations, they basically belong to a share server, and they have like a foreign key there in their object. And then we can just switch the share server ID of the network allocation, and we should be just fine, because the allocations are already created, and they are already up, and just switching the share server ID of this should be just okay. So basically here we just check again if the network allocations were reused. We use the same method as used in the setup share server. And then we just update the network allocations of the share server if there is need to, and also get the backend details of the search share server and add it to the destination share server, considering that the migration should basically, the share server should have the same parameters as the search. So that's, I would say these are the most important things for the core part. And then we have like,
hold on a sec.
yeah.
So you're reusing the same method. So that's going to be another driver call to go ahead and ask if the driver needs new IPs. But we're asking this once during setup and once during the complete. We don't expect this to change. And I mean, for some weird reason, if the driver tells you that, no, I do need new allocations, what happens?
Yeah, in this case, we wouldn't expect that to happen, but in this case, we will just like, yeah, this could lead the Manila to like get new allocations here, or just like not update this. So yeah, this could, if the driver responds like differently in the first call and in the second time, there would be like a misbehavior for this scenario.
Yeah, and there's no way to tell, even for an existing driver, if there's some sort of a configuration change that happened at the back end, or some weird thing that could because even a shared driver is not going to just do this statically. It's going to go do some checks on the storage system and come back and tell you whether this is possible, right? So is it possible for us to just assume that the result that we've gotten at first is the result we're going to go with, and just store it in the backend info or someplace, so that you can reuse that to adjust your allocations in this place? And the
Yes,
reason I
and
say that is, you can't predict what the drivers are going to do, and from what I can tell, I can't, and maybe if I were implementing this in a driver, and if something changed underneath me, I could potentially do the wrong thing here.
yeah, that's right. So we would need to have a way to just check if the network was reused when we were setting up the share server, so we can avoid like a misbehavior here. And that, yeah, that's a good point. And
And the other thing I wanted to check with you is this check for the driver. Is this separate check required at all? Because you already have a share server migration check that already does some amount of validation based on whatever inputs you're giving it. Like you want to go across to this particular host, you want to move to this particular share network, you want this to be non-disruptive, or do you want it to be whatever, right? So writable, preserving snapshots, etc. All of those fancy things, but we're doing all of that in check. So what was the need to introduce a new driver interface to just do this thing about reusable IPs?
yeah, basically, we decided to go with that approach because we could just like create these new driver calls. But yeah, there is like a new way to another way to do that, which would be to return new parameters in the check for this. But yeah, the idea of this was to just in the setup server, we could just call these new driver interfaces, because like there will we would need to forward less parameters in the setup server. And that was one of the reasonings to do this. But I see no problem on adding this to, like, the driver can reuse the network interfaces, and if the share server could be reused in the check as well. So basically,
No, yeah,
create.
totally. And the reason I already also asked for this simplification is because you really don't need all of this, right? Like part of the thing is, hey, I'm doing this non-disruptively. And if the driver tells me that this is a non-disruptive migration, I'm not going to allocate network resources, period. I'm not going to need, there's no need to ask the driver, can you reuse your IPs? Because the driver is claiming that it can do a non-disruptive migration. That means it has to reuse the network allocations. We're not going to, ask you again, are you sure or something, right? Does that make sense? So you already have this interface with the migration check. You maybe have to move this to the migration check and just handle it that way. And it makes things a whole lot simpler for you, even in the share manager, right? You'd just say, hey, the administrator is asking me if you can check for this migration, or the administrator is asking me to start this migration, and you're going to first do a migration check. And as part of that, you're going to let me know if it's non-disruptive or not. And if it's non-disruptive, I'll cache that information. I'm not going to create new network interfaces at all. Network allocations at all.
Yes. This could be added to return of the migration check, as well as like 2 new items in the dictionary. So if we just need it somewhere else. But saying that is non-disruptive, we could already imply that the IP is going to be reused, because yeah, that makes total sense. I
Yeah.
completely agree with this.
I'm going to make you delete a lot of code, but I think it kind of simplifies your design. That
Yeah, it
way
makes a
you
lot
don't.
simpler.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a bunch of this is going to be removed now, and but that's good points and good remarks there. And I think apart from this, we only have the parameter being forwarded in the shared PC API and unit tests.
All right. Now to the controversial meat in this. What is that discussion about the cleanup server? Because I have some thoughts, but you can possibly recap what's going on between you and Rodrigo, I guess.
Yes. So basically, we, as I said in the beginning, we have introduced a new parameter to the shared server migration start API, which is called CleanupSearchServer. And with this parameter, the administrators is like able to add to implicitly say if the share server should be deleted at the end of the migration here. So we have implemented these, and there is like a patch in the a new change in the Python Manila client as well, with these changes, with like unit tests and other things. But that's basically the need for this. So we needed to tell to ask the driver and to forward this to the driver somehow. So we added this parameter, and the administrators will be able to like explicitly say if they want to if they want the share server to be deleted right after the migration or not. And Rodrigo's got a point here, and he added a comment about this. And what basically in a summary, what he's saying is that we would not need to have this parameter, because when the administrators have the delete share server with less share, the share server will be automatically deleted after the migration, or the administrator could just like delete the share server that is inactive after the migration. And by doing that, by dropping this parameter, it would like add less complexity to the code, and it would be easier to test, and we would not add like much complexity more to Manila. And yeah, that was basically the point that Rodrigo was mentioning on this. And I wanted to discuss this with more people, with a bigger crowd, because we can get more input on this thing. But that was one of the basically one of the things that like led us to implement this new parameter.
You, I actually am not clear about that in the sense there was a specific use case why you needed to keep the share server around, or what was the problem? Like, what did the previous code do? Uh, was it not cleaning up the share server?
The previous code only cleans up the share server if we have this configuration delete share server with let's share configured. So if we have this set to true, at the end of the migration, it will just try to delete the share server automatically. And if it's set to false, the share server is just going to be set to inactive, and the share server will be laying there until like the next routine will identify it as the like we will identify it as a deletable share server, or the administrator just go there and tries to delete this share server. So this is the current behavior we have for this. And if we introduce like a new way to the administrator to like just ensure that the share server must be deleted after the migration, it will be just like yeah, it will be just a way to allow the administrator to explicitly say that they want to the share server, the search share server, to be deleted after the migration. So that was basically the need.
Yeah. So some thoughts around this. So a couple of ways of deleting share servers, and for two specific or different ways of doing this, right? We'll keep migration out of this. Any share server, it is the impression that we had when designing that was saying that setting up, tearing down these things are more time consuming, resource intensive than setting up and deleting shares. And so we allowed share servers to linger longer than shares themselves. So even if you did create a share, delete a share, the share server that was associated with the share will stay on unless it will stay on for a little bit. And what is that little bit? There was an automatic reaping interval which within the share manager where we just find all the unused share servers and delete them. And I think it's 15 minutes or so.
Yes.
Every 15 minutes there's like a loop. And then we came along and added a new option that said delete share server on if it's empty. That's the option that you're talking about, which is if the last share on the share server was being deleted, we just go ahead and clean up the share server. This was useful because some of them, some of the backends, creating a share server was nothing. It was just as resource intensive as creating a share. And so it made sense for administrators to set this other option to kind of optimize the deletion. We don't need to now wait for that interval. We just go ahead and clean it up anyway. So you already have these two knobs. One is how often do you want that reaping to occur automatically, and so you basically have unused share servers, and you give those unused share servers an opportunity to just stay on in case a new provisioning request comes in, and so you can reuse those share servers. Or you're intolerant about this thing. You basically want the share server gone as soon as we delete the shares that are on it. You allow it to be cleaned up. But migration does not is like a third scenario in my view. It's not really like a normal provisioning, in the sense you've gone ahead, made the decision to move a share server from host X to host Y, and your intention is that it's gone from the source, right? Because you've moved it.
Yes.
It kind of makes a little sense for us to preserve that share server, because the whole intent of you moving it was to not have it in the source. So if we left it there, for reusability. It's not really the expectation that the administrator has, right?
Yep.
Because it's possible that they were planning to decommission. I mean, migration is like a end state activity, right? For some reason, I mean, you're ending the life cycle of that uh, resource from its source. So we shouldn't even be bothered about this delete share server with last share or the share server reaping interval. We should just go ahead and reap it right away. We don't need to be worried about what the administrator wants with all share servers. We just know the intent that the administrator wants to move the share server to a different host. We've moved all the workloads. We're done with the share server. Let's go ahead and clean it up.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, and I've had like 2 other ideas about this. So just in case, like in terms of user experience, it does not get so good, because like it could sound, for some people, it could sound like weird to set the CleanupSearchServer in the migration start command. But another option was to add this in the complete command. So when we hit like share server migration complete, we would just be able to set this CleanupSearchServer as well, and we would like keep the same behavior as we had in the past if we did not want that to happen. And another one was to add like a backend config option, and the backends would be the share driver would need to act on this actually if like they would want the share server to be cleaned up, the share servers or the share servers related to that specific backend stanza to be cleaned up after the migration. But I mean, I get your point on basically being able to, or that we should be deleting the share servers right after the migration, because we have already moved, we have already done the job to migrate it to another destination. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's predictable. I mean, that's what the administrator wants. They're moving. They don't care about their old share server, and we shouldn't try to optimize it for them. And I mean, it was okay to optimize for provisioning, because we don't expect anyone to care about share servers at that point. They only need to care about share networks. An administrator is not the one creating these shares. End users are, and they only want to put something on a share network, and with the virtue of all the logic that we have and the share driver's behavior, we kind of end up creating a share server, and we decide whether to use that share server or reuse a different share server. I mean, we control that whole process, and so we control the reusability as well for that. But with migration, the administrators explicitly told us something, and we should just do that. I don't see any reason to leave it behind and increase the complexity, right? Because you've now set it to inactive, which means we're waiting for a reaping interval to come along, or we are going to ask if you've deleted the last share server, and if you've not set that config option, we currently don't delete your share server at all, which kind of seems wrong in terms of leaking resources, because you have not given up network allocations. Say this is a non-disruptive, this is a disruptive migration. You're holding on to network allocations. And second, I don't know whether you have some sort of quotas on the backends with the number of share servers you could possibly have. But if an administrator forgets to delete their share server, it's left behind, right? It's an orphan resource. So sort of what I'm asking is like a rework on the previous behavior of this as well, which is, let's go ahead and clean up the share servers always in case of migration, and let's not give them any choices. I don't suppose we need yet another option beyond the ones that we have.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes total sense to me.
And simplifies your code, right? I think we're like, I guess, I mean, I don't mean to like make you delete a bunch of code, but I mean, deleting code is good. Like I mean, you're building a better experience, I think.
Yeah, it's for a good reason. Yeah. No, I'm with you on this. Yes. So
Anyone else has any thoughts?
yep,
And Tom says there's definitely less to test. Agreed. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with the general drift here.
Yeah, so that's the point. One of the points we wanted to discuss in the further core change, and now there's like some NetApp code for it as well. So we basically implemented this new migration mechanism because the previous one we were using worked like at the end it worked like a migration or a replication of share servers, but this one is actually a migration. So that's why it allowed us to have like a non-disruptive migration, and if there is no network change, and to like the process is going to be like cleaner, and the migration should be basically quite entirely performed by the backend without us to like doing a lot of things here. So in this case, for the NetApp change, we have in the past, we used to have like ZAPI calls for NetApp changes, but now we are basically introducing REST to ONTAP. So from some point in the future, NetApp will stop working with REST calls and with ZAP calls, sorry, and we will only work with REST calls. So the entire NetApp driver will be changed to work with REST calls. And this is basically the kickstart for that, because we, in this change, we have already started implementing the REST call that should be like reused in the future as well. And the migration itself for share servers also only works in like works on REST. So yes, we have started this this work here, and there are some changes in the API where we basically send the ZAPI calls. So now when we are sending a request, we are basically able to specify if we want to send a ZAPI call or a REST call. In this case, all of the migration calls will be like REST calls. So there's like a lot of code moving here and restructuring in this part of the code. So here, I tried to use a lot of this code, so we could like keep the same behavior, and yeah, that was basically the intention here. So when we want to send REST calls, we just send REST calls, and we explicitly say that. And yeah, there's like a new REST client implemented here. Oh, Fab's left a comment here. Thanks, Fab. And there's basically like a new REST client, and to perform the calls that are supposed to go through the REST API. And yeah, a lot of code reusage here and the restructuring. So we just basically choose the best clients to do the calls here, and then we just do the operations with the clients that we are supposed to use. So yeah.
Carlos,
Yeah.
I have a question. Is this REST code being exercised in the NetApp CI? So the current ONTAP version is actually using this code, or you plan to provide an output for us? Because I think that you still don't have this ONTAP running, right?
Yeah. This ONTAP code is not in a like these REST calls are not being performed in ONTAP in our CI yet, but I have provided, let me, oh, yeah. I have provided an output of Tempest tests using these REST calls here. Oh, I think they're like, let me check. It's I just added a paste here of the Tempest outputs for this, because we do not have ONTAP 9.10 available yet. So where's my comment? Oh, here. So there's a paste here with Tempest test outputs, and this basically these Tempest test outputs are these Tempest tests are using the new SVM migrate, And this is SVM migrate is using the REST call. So we can see that the test best. I can provide more logs as well. It's kind of difficult to take it from the environment I'm using because like it's a pretty high control thing. But yeah, I can just provide it if you want to see like the outputs of the calls in the Manila share logs or other things. But the outputs of the Tempest tests are here because, and I just needed to paste it here because this functionality will be released in ONTAP basically alongside with the new ROSP release. So they are going to come out like together. And in order to prove it's working, I just added here the Tempest test outputs. But if you need any more info about this, I can just provide to you.
And there is code in the driver that prevents this in case you don't have ONTAP 9.10 and beyond.
Yes.
Check versions.
Yeah, I basically in the beginning of the migration or for any migration thing we want to do or for any migration operation, we just check the ONTAP version if and we just see if the migration can be performed using SVM migrate or SVMDR. So in this case here, when the ONTAP version is like bigger than 9.10, it will always use SVM migrate, and if it's not 9.10 yet, it will use SVMDR. So basically, all the operations have this check and have a control for this. In the migration start, for instance, like I try to reuse a lot of code as well. Let me check here are the calls to the ONTAP. So in the clients mode file where we basically add some calls and send the requests to ONTAP. And here we have where I define the REST endpoints for the calls, and then we can just like get the endpoint we want to send the migration, and we can just format the URL for this. And here in the multi SVM, I am supposed here. Yeah, I am adding like some checks to see if the migration will be performed using SVMDR or SVM migrate. And when I just start the migration, it will just check the versions from both source and destination ONTAPs. And if both are bigger than 9.10, then we should be performing SVM migrate instead of SVMDR. So yeah, a bunch of code reusage here. So the check for SVM migrate and the SVMDR are different as expected. So when it's SVM migrate, we just need to send the migration start request and specify a flag called check only equals to true. And then instead of actually starting a migration, it will only perform a check for a migration. And here we wait until the job state gets like in a success state. And we return the result and we say that the migration is going to be performed using SVM migrate in this case. Yeah, so.
Is there so in the driver, there is no sort of validation that you're doing with respect to networking and stuff. And the reason I ask is this, that you could have two different, no, you wouldn't, right? Like you expect the administrator to have configured this and put them on the same replication domain. Otherwise, this whole thing won't work, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so it's the same behavior that you are keeping for the even when you're doing non-disruptive.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So the administrator has verified that these two are networked the same way. I mean, the host and the destination. So we don't need to worry about any more validation in the networking. Whether if we move stuff, is the new network going to work at all, or the existing network going to be reachable at all?
Yep. So basically, here continue. There's some the operations now using the REST calls when is SVM migrate, and the SVMDR calls were basically used, and I just tried to split them and reuse the keep the parts that are used for both in the same method. Like basically, I try to reuse a lot of things here. But yeah, the migration check here, where I define if it's we define if it's going to be non-disruptive or not. So basically, if the migration method is FCM migrate, and if the share network hasn't changed, it's the way we are basically saying that the migration is or isn't going to be disruptive. The migration start also changed, so we have now the migration start using SVMDR, and the migration start using SVM migrate, which has like different steps for it. In this case, we just need to ensure that the cluster has migrate policy and the migrate policies, and we are doing that. Also, we are basically reusing the IP space when it's possible to reuse IP spaces and broadcast domains and other NetApp specific stuff. And we just send the migration to start. And in the backend details now, we are storing, we are basically returning the migration operation ID, because when we start the share server migration now, the migration status is like kept by ONTAP, and ONTAP will be, we will just need to check the result or check the progress of the migration, or see if it's like it's still up or if it failed. For this, we will need to have this migration UID that was returned by the migration start job. So it sends a post request to ONTAP, and then we get the migration ID, and then we save this migration ID in the share server. It's kind of discussable on this part, because after implementing this, I was discussing with Felipe, and we basically said that another way to do this would be to use the private storage to store information about the migration. And then we wouldn't need to add the migration operation ID to the share server, because if we add this to the backend details of the share server, it's going to be like visible to the administrators as well. So another way to do this would be to add to the private storage, and basically here choosing which method we are going to use for share server migration. And in the other operations like share server migration continue, we just check if the migration, the share server that's being migrated has a migration ID. If it has a migration ID, then it's being SVM migrates being performed, not an SVMDR migration. So we can just like forward the request to the SVM migrate. Otherwise, we just use the SVMDR method. And yeah, there's like the migration complete as well. The migration complete now works kind of differently, because in the other way we were basically doing like a replication, and now it's actually a migration. So we just get the migration complete, and we just trigger it. For cancel, it's a different scenario as well. Basically, we need to ask the migration to be completed, and we need to wait until the job status is like successful, and then we need to wait until the migration is actually finished. So we keep like sending requests to the ONTAP and waiting for the migration to be finished. We have a pre-configured, we use the pre-configured timeout for this that was already defined by in the NetApp driver, and there's a method here that where we basically define this wait operation. It's here. Yeah, we reuse the NetApp server migration state change timeout, which is a config option already configured in the NetApp driver, and that like people would be able to change it as well. So yes, here, continue. In order to see if the first phase was completed, we just need to check if the state of the migration is like ready for cutover. And yeah, if the state is ready for cutovers, it means that the share server migration was completed. The first phase was completed, and then we can just like start the second phase of the migration. Now, then we have share server migration continue. which basically decides whether to call the continue for SVM migrate or for SVMDR. And share server migration complete, kept a lot of code and reused a bunch of it. But there are some different things for SVM migrate and for SVMDR. And the cancel also got some different things as well. The cancel, we can't like actually send a cancel request directly, so we need to first ask the job to be paused, and then we need to ask the job to be completed. So as soon as we identify that the job is paused, we just send the cancel request, which is abort, share server migration abort, or server migrate abort. And then we wait until this job is successful as well. So we make sure that this is done. And also some teardowns were handled as well to like clean up IP spaces and other things created by this migration. So yeah, and like from here below, it's basically unit tests for this change. We are at the hour. Anyone else has any problem to continue?
Nope, I can stay. I think you're making good progress. You're wrapping up fast. Even here, there's going to be a bunch of code deletion, but it's not going to be a lot, right? This is just the implementation of that method that we discussed.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yep, but I didn't answer that question you asked. Yes, we are at the hour. In case there are other meetings, please feel free to drop off. This is being recorded, so we can wrap this up at your pace, Carlos, and post the recording in case someone decides to drop off.
Yep. So yes, basically these are the operations. A bunch of code was reused from the previous migration method we had, which was SVMDR, and now we can just use SVM migrate to have these calls performed, to have the migration performed, and it should be like it should have a better performance, and it should be faster, and it would require less things from the administrators. And there is one thing as well that I wanted to mention here, that is basically when we are starting a shared server migration, we need to specify a new parameter here in the client mode. We need to send a new parameter, which is called actually to clean up the search share server. So basically, this parameter basically allows ONTAP, or ONTAP will basically decide if the search share server should be automatically cleaned up after the migration. And we kind of have this parameter here as well. And if we set this to false, the search share server would be like stopped in the search backend. And as let's suppose we trigger the cutover phase and the new share server is already up, I would be able to start reading from this new share server as well. I would be able to start on it, but the new share server would be locked. And for instance, I wouldn't need to delete, I wouldn't be able to delete a share server, a share from the share server that was currently migrated until I actually get the search cleanup triggered. So until I get like the search cleanup triggered in the backend, the share server will be kind of in a lock state, and we won't be able to delete any shares of it until the search cleanup operation is actually triggered. So yeah, that's one thing that's quite important. And if we do not like perform this search cleanup, the administrator would need to do this like manually. But as we intend to delete the share server automatically now, when I'm deleting the share server, instead of deleting the share server, when I identify that this is a search share server for a migration, I can just say, ask ONTAP to do the search cleanup instead, and then the share server would already disappear from the backend. and that should work just fine.
So currently, how is that being called? Is it being called at all on migration complete, or you're just calling it on share server delete?
Currently, we are reusing the same parameter from the share server migration start, which is that CleanupSearchServer, and then we forward this to the driver interface, to the migration start interface, and we reuse this because if the administrator say they want to have the search cleanup performed, then it would be already configured in the migration, and when we trigger the migration complete phase, the search share server would be already deleted, and the migration wouldn't get to a state called waiting for search cleanup.
Okay, so instead now, because we're going to definitely clean up the share server, this parameter will disappear. You're going to set the auto source cleanup to true, correct?
Yes, yes, it will save a lot of time here, and a lot of code as well.
Awesome. And is this at any point, if you do an auto source cleanup equals true, is that happening alongside the migration, or does that also wait for that cutover to clean up the source?
Sorry, it happens only after the cutover phase. So as soon as we trigger the cutover phase, it will set the destination share server to up, and it will be working properly. And then when it realizes everything is working just fine, it will go to the next phase which is the auto search cleanup, the search cleanup. So it will perform the search cleanup like just like immediately, and it will remove the entry from the search backend. In the search backend, the share server will be already stopped, and it will be kind of unreachable, I would say, as it's stopped, and we can't do any operations with it. But yeah, as we have the auto search cleanup set to true, this is going to be performed right after the migration complete operation.
Great. Awesome. This looks great. And yeah, I mean, maybe the REST interface introduction is going to be a really cool thing for you folks. Did you check if the tracing and all that still works?
Yeah, it works, and it was quite useful while implementing because there were lots of new issues when I was testing the code, and it was just the tracing was working just fine, and I was able to see like the outputs, and even though it's not XML anymore, it just prints the entire JSON of that it's receiving or that it's sending to the ONTAP, so it was still quite useful.
Awesome. Yeah, I think at some point we had to do some pretty printing to get the the XML right, but I'm hoping JSON printing JSON was easier. Is it pretty printing, or is it like?
Yeah, it's printing more like. I mean, it's not printing like formatted like this. It's printing like as it was a string, so it's not that pretty at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I think you'll have to go change the NA utils thingy.
Yeah.
Which at some point we were messing with for the XML pretty printing, and that is I think kind of useful. Otherwise, you're gonna have people complaining that these logs are unparsable.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. But yeah, in the future, we are going to have changes for in Manila for lots of functionalities in ONTAP because the entire driver will need to be migrated to REST, as I said. So there's going to be an effort, and it will help folks in the future as well. So it's nice to do that now.
Are there any new permissions that are required to have REST capabilities? I think it treats doesn't it treat REST as a completely different capability for the users?
doesn't. Usually it comes like already enabled in ONTAP, and you need to, but basically it uses the same part as that you used in the past. So we are using the part 80 for ONTAP, and when it is listening uh, to this part. So we just need to do the same thing we needed to do for ZAPI calls, which is to set the HTTP enable flag in ONTAP to true, and then we would be able to send requests. But this flag also blocks things from ZAPI. So yeah, but it's good to give like a heads up to administrators where we should basically tell them to uh, check if this is really allowed in their clusters and make sure if there is such thing. But in
Absolutely.
our
No,
environment selectors, yeah.
that's exactly what I'm asking in terms of, you know, I mean, one of the things is don't use the admin user, and because the admin user has access to everything. But I mean, it's so easy for us to keep testing with the admin user that we forget, you know, maybe I mean, there's a lot of Red Hat customers of NetApp that have custom user created, custom users created. And so they are following this document, for example, to create those users. So if there is anything required that needs to change, we add it for this feature. I mean, please to call it out, I guess, because that will be something that might surprise people.
Yeah, that's quite important, and we should really be paying attention to this. We are doing some effort to basically add some more jobs to our downstream CI at this point, because it's important to have the outputs for SVM scoped accounts as well. We have some periodic, and it's basically, it helps us to filter lots of bugs when implementing things.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that SVM scope thing is huge, I guess, because that's where we've hit most of these issues. But we do have a bunch of DHS's true customers. And I've not heard a lot with respect to problems with DHS is true, but I know from you know, context and history that you know, testing, for example, we at Red Hat, when we ever play with DHS is true and an NetApp, we end up using the admin user. It's the wrong thing because ultimately that's probably not what the customers are doing.
Yeah,
but I'm hoping
definitely.
you folks are testing it the right way.
Yeah. Thanks for the heads up, and can just take a look in this documentation.
Awesome.
Yeah, we intend to have this documentation improved in the next days as well. We try to do not like stay a month within the release or within the changes were merged to actually merge new documentation, because in this way we allow people to already start using it properly and see what's new in the things we have added for this. And we try to keep this DOG for NetApp pretty up to date.
Absolutely, that's awesome. I did want to ask, so you're saying that the CI is not going to run this job until 9.10 releases, and your time frame for that release is, I actually didn't understand that part.
It's close to October.
Oh,
It's
okay.
they both release, both ROSP and both RC1 and the ONTAP release will be pretty close.
Oh, I
Their
see.
timelines are quite equal.
I'm not sure what we're releasing in October, to be honest. But yeah, that makes sense. So right now, yeah, definitely do run CI, do run Tempest tests and share your logs. That would be useful to see that this stuff is working. But is the previous version, that is SVM migration, enabled on your CI, where it does not use these code paths, but it's going to fall back to the replication and cut over sort of?
Yeah,
Logic.
currently the CI will keep using the SVM DR, and then as when we just get these new versions, we can just update some of our own tabs in our lab, and then we can get some 910s working and some jobs running on it. It's in the roadmap for after like the ONTAP gets released, we can just like update some ONTAPs here and make it work with this SVM migrate. But these are something I was kind of concerned about as well, because we need tempest testing for this, and it's important to test these things with the functional tests. While I was testing, I got like 1 bug, 2 bugs, just with functional tests. So it's very important to use the scenarios as metrics as well.
Yeah, and I'm concerned about regression. Like whatever was working in the past cycles, you said this is there since the Victoria cycle. So we don't want to break user experience, users, workflows because this new method came in. And if somebody does not upgrade their ONTAP, you're still going to use the old methods.
Yes.
So it's worth running this through regression testing against an older cluster with everything that was working for you in the older cluster.
Yeah, totally.
So is that part happening in the CI or automatically, or is that something that you've not enabled in the CI?
Yeah, that part's happening already. Our CI
Okay.
is already running tests, share server migration tests. So we can just see the outputs here for the NetApp CI or the logs in the NetApp job. But we have allowed share server migration tests to be executed. And so as we don't have SVM migrate yet, it will just like use the SVM DR instead of using SVM migrate. So it's basically testing. And we have like some sort of metrics at this point to do not have the entire lab in a single version. So we have a couple of ONTAPs that are running 9.8, another ones that are running 9.9, and we'll have some more running 9.10. So we can have the code being tested against different versions from ONTAP.
That's awesome.
So yeah, but basically the tests are being tested right now with SVM migrate, and we can ensure that nothing is broken. So any other questions?
Nothing from me. This is actually really good. Feels quite straightforward.
Yeah, a bunch of things could be reused in this implementation, and Douglas did a great job writing the share server migration the first time. So I could just reuse a lot of things that he wrote. And I just needed to implement the new migration methods and decide what was going to be re-implemented and what I could just reuse that there. Yep.
Good job, Carlos.
Thank you, Douglas.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is some really good work.
Thank you, Ashley. Okay, so as we don't have any other questions, I think we can just wrap up. So I'll just stop recording, and we will upload this video to YouTube.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for this, and for sharing, going through the whole thing, and for